This is Abhishek Sengupta and welcome back. You are listening to Abhishek Sengupta audio blogs. In this episode, we are taking up the India-Australia Free Trade Agreement which has been signed recently. On 22nd of November 2022, Australian Parliament has approved the Free Trade Agreement. Now with this, India, Australia, both the countries are free to implement this Free Trade Agreement. Now with this, the bilateral trade between India and Australia is expected to go double in next 5 years. As on date, the bilateral trade between India and Australia is 27.5 billion US dollar and it is expected to reach 45 to 50 billion US dollars in next 5 years. Now this is a huge leap. Now in this episode, we will understand what is this all about and how this will impact the business and economies of both the countries. Let's see. First thing first, let us know what is this free trade agreement. A free trade agreement or a free trade treaty is a legal agreement between two countries in order to facilitate and establish a free trading zone. Now such type of trade agreements are broadly classified into two types. One is bilateral and second is multilateral. Bilateral trade agreements happen when the two countries or the two cooperating countries agree to relax their trade restrictions between themselves in order to boost business and trade. Now in case this agreement happened between three or more countries, such kind of agreement is known as the multilateral trade agreement. Now multilateral trade agreement or their negotiation are a bit complicated and at times it is difficult to arrive at a mutual consent in order to go ahead with the deal. Such kind of trade agreements take a little more time as compared to the bilateral trade agreements. Now India's Free Trade Agreement or FTA has taken a full circle. With the start of the century, India has negotiated the trade agreement with many countries. Some to name are Singapore, Japan, Korea, ASEAN countries. India's Look East policy has significantly contributed the trade agreement and the trade expansion with South Asian countries as well as Far East Asian countries as well. With this, the India and other countries are also getting benefited. Now with trade, the economy flourishes and with trade, the much needed foreign currency is earned. Much needed forex reserves are earned. Now next is, what is this India-Australia Free Trade Agreement? In May 2011, India and Australia has formally initiated a talk on comprehensive economic cooperation agreement. However, in the year 2016, both the countries have formally suspended the negotiations. Now, this negotiation resumed once again in the year 2021. Now, this negotiation was formally opened in order to quicken the process as well as to deepen the trade ties between the both countries. The free trade agreement between both the countries formally came into effect on 29th of December, months after both the countries agreed upon this. Now, via this agreement, Australia has agreed to eliminate custom duties on 98.3% of the goods and 100% of the trade line in next 5 years. In return, India has agreed to eliminate tariff on 40% of the goods and 70% of the goods in next 10 years. Many labor-intensive sectors of India is expected to get benefited from this. Some sectors to name are textiles, apparels, agricultural products, leather, furniture, jewelry, and the pharmaceutical products. Now, after the trade agreement goes into effect, it is expected to increase or double the trade between India and Australia in next 5 years. Now, next is, what is the current trade volume between India and Australia? Indian imports from Australia worth 17 billion US dollars. Whereas the exports to Australia worth 10.5 billion US dollars. One thing to note over here is that India's import from Australia, out of which 96% are the raw materials and intermediate goods. Coal import includes a major chunk of it. 74% of Australia's export to India includes coking coal. On the other hand, India's export to Australia includes diverse good and finished products. On the other hand, India spends approximately 4 billion US dollar on the education of Indian students in Australia. Next is which all the sectors which is expected to have an impact because of this. Now, this India-Australia Free Trade Agreement has got basic 8 points around which the agreement revolves around. Number 1 is the trade in goods. Number 2, trade in services. Number 3 is rules of origin. Number 4 is technical barrier to trade and sanitary and phytosanitary measures. Next point is custom procedures and trade facilitation. Number 6, the trade remedies. Number 7, legal and institutional issues. Last, point number 8, the movement of natural persons. Now next is what are the benefits of this agreement? Trade in goods, the access to Australian market with zero custom duty. This agreement is expected to benefit many labor-intensive Indian industrial sectors which are subject to 5% import duty in Australia. Now this will result in immediate duty-free market access to 98.3% of the tariff lines. Now this is accounting for 96.4% of India's value-added export to Australia. The remaining 1.7% of the trade lines will be reduced to zero duty in a span of 5 years. Now, in other words, in long run, Australia offers almost 0% duty-free of 100% of India's tariff lines. Number 2 is cheaper raw materials and faster approval for medicines. Almost all labor-intensive sectors will have an immediate duty-free access to the Australian market. As a result, many industries will have access to the cheaper raw materials which will help them to compete in the international market. Under this agreement, both the countries have agreed for a separate annexure for pharmaceutical products. And this will result in a fast-track approval for patented, generic and biosimilar medicines. Point number 3 is almost 90% of Australia's export will have a zero duty access to the Indian market. Now, India is providing a zero duty access to almost 90% of Australian exports, including coal. Zero duty on 85.3% of the export lines will be provided immediately, whereas zero duty on 3.67% of the product line trade lines will be provided over a period of time. Now, interesting thing to note here is that there is also something called a exclusion list. India has excluded certain products from this agreement, which includes milk and dairy products, wheat, sugar and so on. This is done in order to protect the Indian market and Indian products. Point number 4 is the collateral benefits. Now, this free trade agreement or a zero duty access to both the market is expected to generate around 1 million jobs in India and 10 billion US dollars additional export from India to Australia. Now, the next point is benefit under trade in services. Number 1 is post-study work visa. Now, Indian students studying in Australia will get benefited from the post-study work visa. Now, here I must say Australia's commitment under the trade in services are the best. It is almost at par with the FTA with UK. Australia has committed its schedule to the negative list and has made a broad commitment with almost 135 subsectors. It has also gone ahead with 120 subsectors with the most favored nation status. Now, along with this, 100,000 Indian students in Australia will be benefited with this. Apart from that, it has also got some good provisions for work visa as well as the visitor visa in Australia for Indian nationals. Now, point number 2, Australian services will get a negative list treatment in next 5 years. Now, after 5 years of the agreement coming into force, India has also committed negative listing for Australian services. Now, an interesting question might come up: what is negative listing? Under negative listing approach, a country treats its goods and services imported as well as locally generated at par without any difference. The places where the negative listing is not done are known to be excluded from negative listing approach. Now, India will grant the status to Australian service exports after a period of 5 years. India is also committing a most favored nation status to 103 service subsectors. Now, these are the benefits which both the countries will have in case of goods trade or service trade. But it is equally important to guard this agreement from any unwanted or unintended consequences or situations. Now, how to do this? Now, this agreement has also made the provisions for this. In order to protect both the countries from unintended trade consequences, certain provisions are made in this agreement. So what are these provisions? Now, for this, 5-point safeguards are put in the agreement. Number 1 is stringent rule of origin. Number 2 is in calculation of value addition. 2 different types of values are agreed to in this agreement. Now, this is dependent on the method using which it is calculated. Now, this is based on whether the profit is included or excluded. Now, next point is product specific rules were negotiated for 807 products. Point number 4 is requirement of melt and pour for iron and steel products are included in the product specific rules for these products. Next is strict customs and operational procedures. Apart from this, one specific clause has been added wherein the items made in Australia will only count for value addition and no other countries. Now, next is bilateral trade safeguard mechanism. Now, this is also put in the agreement and this will be available for next 14 years in case of sudden surge in imports. Now, a special clause on review is also agreed upon in which either of the countries can request for a review for a part of an agreement which is causing a concern after 15 years. Now, here the review is compulsory if requested, and this has to be completed within 6 months of time. Now, the next important point in this agreement is end to the double taxation. There is no domestic provision in Australia for charging taxes on royalty, fees, charges paid to the parent companies by the firms. However, the remittances were taxed using special provision in double taxation avoidance agreement. However, as a result of this treaty, Australia has changed and amended their tax laws. Now, this has led to the removal of this disparity. Now, this will come into effect from 1st of April 2023 and this double taxation or this disparity will end. Now, this will have a positive impact on the IT sector. Now, they will be able to earn a higher profit and will be more competitive in the global market. Now, next is how is this beneficial for India? It is quite obvious to ask what is there for India, how India is protecting its interest in this agreement. So let us analyze this now. Point number 1, India has not provided access to certain lines of product for Australian exports. This includes milk and dairy products, wheat, sugar, iron ore, apple and walnuts. Now, it is interesting to note that these products include a major part of Australia's overall exports. Now, Australia hopes to gain a market share in the Indian market for some of its products like coal, wines, as well as some quotas in agriculture and horticulture products. But again, it is interesting to note that these are already getting imported in India from Australia. Australia has granted 100% duty relief to the Indian goods, whereas India has made it in a phase-wise manner. Immediately, certain products will gain access, whereas rest of the products will gain access over a period of time. This will help many indigenous products or many indigenous industries in India to plan for it and get used to it and plan for the next phase of their action. The next point is pharmaceutical industry. Now with this agreement, the pharmaceutical industry is expected to gain a lot. Now drugs manufactured in the other countries will receive a faster approval in Australia. Now this will help Indian pharmaceutical companies to gain the market share in the Australian market. As on date, Indian pharmaceutical market has just got 3% market share in Australia. So there is a lot of scope for Indian pharmaceutical companies in the Australian market. Now next is significant gain is also expected in India's labor intensive sectors. Now they will gain the duty-free access, which will be comparable to Vietnam or other countries, and this will also make them competitive in the world market. Next point is visas of students, employees, workers and agricultural workers will have special provision and a liberal grant. The last point is this agreement will give India an ample scope and opportunity to recoup from the loss created by withdrawing from RCEP, which was actually a free trade agreement with China. Now overall, this free trade agreement will be a boon for both the countries. Both the countries will be able to access each other's market over a period of time. A reduction or zeroing down the import duties or the custom duties will be an added advantage under such agreements. Now this will surely lead to opening up new avenues of business and trade with both the countries, and as a result the bilateral trades between India and Australia is expected to increase to double in next 5 years. Now apart from that, visa and other collateral benefits are also expected out of this agreement. The job creation will be another collateral benefit coming out of this agreement. That's all for today. If you got value from this episode, I request you to like, share and subscribe. To my Apple Podcast listeners, I request for a review. I want an honest review how my podcast is helping you and enhancing your life. I'll be back with many such episodes. Till then, stay tuned, stay connected and have a great day.